Now suppose we have the following data on GDP and its components in US in 2007. So we have Y or the GDP, the total or the sum of all the four components. As we can see in the table, consumption expenditure constitutes the largest share of GDP. So of the four components, mas malaki yung share ni consumption expenditure. And this is true to all GDP in the country. So mas malaki talaga yung consumption spending of the country compare sa ibang components. So next column, we have percent of GDP. So using this information, we can say that consumption expenditure constitutes 70.3% of the total GDP ng US. And then investment constitutes 15%, around 15% of the GDP of the US. Then government spending, its share of GDP is 19%, while net export is negative 5.1%. Ibig sabihin, class, sa US, negative yung net exports niya. So there, in 2007, merong trade deficit in US. So more imports than exports. So if we will add this 4, that the sum is equal to this one, 13.8 billions. Then lastly, per capita. So per capita, when we say per capita GDP, to calculate per capita, we have total GDP divided by the total population. So in this table, hindi binigay yung information about population of the country, population of US. So per capita GDP is 45,825. So it is computed by dividing the total GDP, this amount divided by the total population of US. So similar story dito, per capita government spending, per capita investment, per capita consumption. So we have some activity here, GDP and its components. So we'll identify which component of GDP affected sa situation. So suppose meron tayong 4 na situations here. So Debbie spends $200 to buy her husband dinner at the finest restaurant in Boston. So si Debbie spends $200 to buy her husband a dinner. So which component of GDP is affected or counted? So sa letter A, it's consumption. About letter B, letter C, and letter D. In situation A, it is clear that the transaction of Debbie will go to C, or consumption spending. So in here, there will be an increase, or consumption and GDP rise by $200. What if Debbie is a government employee? Will her transaction affects the GDP of the country? Okay, the answer is no. Government employees engage in consumption just like everyone else. So whether Debbie is a government employee or not, then still her transaction is part of C, and it affects the GDP. Okay, about the second situation, Sarah spends $1,800 on a new laptop to use in her publishing business. The laptop was built in China. Sarah has a business. And in here, the laptop is the equipment or input in her business. But take note, laptop was built in China. So it is investment because, or investment rises by $1,800 because si laptop part ng, or laptop is an investment of Sarah for her publishing business. But net exports fall by $1,800 also because laptop is from the other country or made in the other country. Or here, the value of laptop is recorded in imports. Okay, so in effect, GDP is unchanged. Next, Jane spends $1,200 on a computer to use in her editing business. She got last year's model on sale for a great price from a local manufacturer. So, meron ding paring business si Jane. So, it is part of investment. But, how about the item, the computer? The current GDP and investment do not change because the computer was built last year. The $1,200 na amount is not counted on the present GDP or current GDP. So here, Jane's purchase causes investment for her own business to increase by 1,200. However, the computer is sold out of inventory. So inventory investment falls by $1,200. And the two transactions cancel each other, leaving aggregate investment and GDP unchanged. Next situation, General Motors build $500 million worth of cars, but consumers only buy $470 million of them. So, letter D, merong unsold output. And ano yung tawag sa unsold output? That is inventory investment. So, merong unsold output of around $30 million. So, the difference of $500 and $470 million. So, here, consumption rises by $470 million. Inventory investment rises by $30 million and GDP rises by $500 million.